Look at the story now. Job losses continue to be a major concern in South Africa. And for those fortunate enough to still have jobs, like myself and Faith, there's the issue of pay. We've seen protests for better working conditions and wages, but how effective are they? And how much of a role are unions playing in ensuring workers' demands are addressed? With changing working environments, this morning we look at the relevance of trade unions in South Africa in 2022. To speak on this, I am joined by Professor Lucien van der Walt from the Aggett Labour Studies Unit at Rhodes University. A very good morning to you, Prof, and thank you so much for joining us. Do we still need unions in this country, in this day and age?
Yes, I think it's quite, unions play a major role in defending those who do have work. And I think potentially they can also play a very big role in pushing for policies and gains and shifts in power and wealth that can benefit larger constituencies. So, look, unions are probably the biggest stable civil society organizations other than churches in this country. So they're massive. They have a huge amount of structural power in a way that a street protest or a community-based protest just doesn't, because they're in the heart of the economy. And they provide a basis for uniting people around common demands. So although unions these days are perhaps less prominent than they used to be, we also need to remember that they've historically played a major role in struggles around democracy and liberation and winning basic gains. For example, unions were one of the main things that reduced the black-white pay gap from the 1980s onward, well before we had legislation in place. So generally, yes, I'd say unions are very crucial, and that's why people stay in them. We've probably got somewhere between 3 and 4 million people in unions, so that's a third of the workforce.
Is that perhaps not the issue, Professor, that they have not transformed, they have not evolved, they are still operating as liberation movements as opposed to fighting for the betterment of the worker? You know, they are still seemingly trying to emancipate the worker instead of improve his livelihood. The economy in 2022 here in South Africa is just worsening with everything else that is happening around us, and you would think that the union wants to instead look at improving the lives of South Africans or the lives of their members instead of wanting to free them from, you know, the oppressor.
Well, look, unions are very varied, so it's always a bit difficult to generalize. I mean, in trade unions, we're talking about everything from COSATU, which is linked to the ANC, to the South African Federation of Trade Unions, which has been formed as an alternative, to Solidarity, which is linked to AfriForum, to FEDUSA, the Federation of Unions South Africa. So they're very broad, and it's difficult to generalize. Most union activities on the day-to-day are really about the basics. They're around issues around wages, job security. You had a report earlier about people trying to get permanent work. That's a major issue for unions. And unions have really, to their credit, tried to come up with alternatives. They have pushed consistently for policies that would be more pro-poor, more job-creating, and trying to create a more just society. We often talk about the RDP in South Africa, the Reconstruction and Development Program of '94. It never actually happened, but essentially that came from unions, and that envisaged massive job creation through social upgrading. So I think that the problem for unions is not so much that they're too focused on the past. I think it's more a question that unions have got a number of internal problems, and unions have also struggling to deal with issues around that large pool of people, probably 70% of employees, who are not covered or represented by unions. You know, you can go to a supermarket and you'll see people from one company are shelf packers, people from another company are security guards. Unions don't really represent those people directly. And what this means is when unions split, there's a core of union members, and unions then redivide this core rather than expanding into large numbers, which is what they did in the 80s. They organized the unorganized, whereas now they're stuck in a particular pool of organized people and they struggle to get beyond that.
Professor, are unions in 2022 all talk and no action, or is the all talk the actual action? Are they making enough noise to cause the necessary disruption? Do they even need to act beyond the talk, or do they just need to make enough noise and the action will happen itself?
Look, it's a very good question. I think unions are on the back foot. I think it is remarkable how large our unions are, given mass unemployment. It's actually very unusual worldwide. South Africa's unions have some of the highest union density, that is, the proportion of workers who are in unions in the world. And Southern Africa as a whole is one of the highest regions. I think union density here is just behind North Africa, and only North Europe has higher union density. So we've got higher union density than, say, Asia or the Americas. That said, unions really do struggle to move beyond just dealing with very immediate issues. You know, do you get that extra 200 Rand, say it's a Sibanye mine, to bigger questions. How can we solve the unemployment crisis? And we're talking, as we know, even before COVID, getting close to 10 million unemployed. How do you shift government policy? How do you find ways to re-industrialize the country? Some towns, as you may know, like East London, used to be hubs of a huge textile industry. That's gone. That's gone because the economy is not protected. So how do unions move beyond saying great things at conferences, having great plans, and a day-to-day practice that's actually quite narrow? How do you actually move towards transforming society in a pro-worker direction, whatever that may mean? I think that's where they really do struggle. So we exist in sort of two worlds where on the one side, unions have got great ideas, I think, and wide aspirations, but their day-to-day practice is actually quite narrow. And very often, sadly, it's just about negotiating retrenchment packages. They haven't been able to really stop job losses. They've really struggled to deal with changes like the Fourth Industrial Revolution. They've proved very, very weak on dealing with things like massive outsourcing, people being stuck on casual jobs for long-term processes. So they have what we call they're based in the core to some extent of the working class. But there's a vast number of people out of that unions could engage, address, organize, but that they generally don't, despite aspirations.
Professor, thank you so much for unpacking this issue where unions are concerned. That is Professor Lucien van der Walt coming to us out of Makhanda. He's, of course, from the Neil Aggett Labour Studies Unit at Rhodes University.